Marvel Rivals. As everyone's been saying, this is currently the best free hero shooter on the market. It's also very good for views. But who could be the most profitable? Well, obviously Jeff The Landshark. If I'm being real though, the biggest reason I'm doing this video is because my mom thought he was cute and she asked me to make him. Starting off, I cut out the base of the body. This is insanely new ground for me to be doing something like this. I've never tried to make anything other than humans or humanoid things. I think the craziest I've gone is Rocket, and the only thing really different about him is his head size and tail. I should say, I want to make this equivalent to my character sizes, but that doesn't mean you need to. You can make this out of any material or any size you'd like. For the tail, I use the same strategy. 2 sides and a white bottom. It's also sewn together the same way. I will say that it is pretty challenging flipping it inside out if you're using felt. I recommend being very careful and going one fin at a time. The felt I used was thinner and less durable than the felt I typically use, so I did stretch it out a bit when doing this part. Once it's flipped, you can stuff it. I'd recommend using your scissors or some thin object to stuff it with. I should acknowledge that you may be making this with different materials or different sizes, so some of my advice can be taken with a grain of salt. You know, call me stupid, but I just realized what that means. It's like grain of salt, because the food being a metaphor, is so small that all you'll need is a single grain. I know it probably sounds dumb explaining it, but it's one of those things that I've never really thought of. Like, why do we do that? There's so many sayings that we just accept and don't really think about. Like, why would someone say grain of salt? Anyway, the mouthpiece is done like this to give it some dimension. I then cut out this little blue piece. It's to add the dimension to the nose. It's kind of hard to gauge how I should cut out the rest of the head, so I just sew it on as is. Here's the top of the head cut out. I stitch these triangle parts together, then sew it down to the rest of the face. With the face put on, I can then sew it to the body. I use a technique that helps make it look like it's flipped inside out. This is achieved by putting the thread in, but not pulling it. Once sewn, push the pieces together, then pull the thread together. Depending on how well you do this, it'll turn out pretty nicely. Next is the eyes. I'd recommend to cut them a little larger than I do because I ended up replacing these with bigger eyes later on. While sewing on the eyes, I used thread to pull the eyes together through the head. With that part done, I cut out the mouth. But this obviously isn't enough, so I cut out the gums and teeth. I make sure to add 2 rows of teeth to each gum. Then I sew the teeth to the gums. I do it lightly enough so that I can push them upward, then pull the thread lightly so they stand up. Then I sew the teethy gums down to the mouth. Next, I cut out the tongue. Then sew it to the mouth. Here's the finished mouth. Does anyone remember those weird Dairy Queen ads with the floating mouth? Then I sew the mouth to the face. Then I cut out and sew on these eyebrows. Later on, I'll sew the bigger eyes over this, which makes it look much better, so I would recommend doing that. Next is the fin. I use a plastic mesh to keep it up. I sew both sides together, then sew the plastic piece in. Then I sew it on the same way I had with the teeth. With the body mostly finished, I make the legs. I sew the white part to the blue part, then cut these 2 circles out for the bottoms of the feet and sew them onto the bottom. Then I sew the legs onto the body. Before closing it up, I stuff them. For the hind legs, there's a bit of a different cut. I cut out 2 pieces, then I sew them together. Then I flip it inside out, and I cut out the circles for the bottom of the feet again, and do it like the same as the front. This time, I stuff the legs before sewing them on. I sew the white part on the body first, then sew the blue part on. Lastly, for sewn body detail, I sew on the tiny fins on the tail. They're just triangles that I fold in half and sew together, then I put them onto the tail. Jeff's got all these black lines all over him as part of the Rivals design stuff. To be honest, this is optional for you if you don't want to do it or feel uncomfortable with this one. The only thing I'd recommend is at least drawing the nose or painting it on. You can even do it with thread. I'd recommend that, assuming you have the game of course, you should look at the in-game model while doing this step because I don't really capture the details right in the video. Next, I use a blue paint to paint the back, the fin, the top of the head, and the tail. Then I put it to dry. When dried, I grab more paint and use a pin to paint the eyes. The eyes have these subtle blue rings inside them, so I try to the best of my ability to replicate that. Once I have the rings, I take some white paint and paint the little white glints in his eyes. Because I don't have any pink paint, I use this pink fabric marker to draw on his little feet paw things. What are these even called? It's kind of like a cat. Now the body is finished. All he needs is a collar. The collar is just a long purple strip I put around his neck, then sew it. I had to use pink thread because I don't have a matching purple. Then I take this gold paint and paint the details. I also cut out a tag that I forgot to show. I used the paint to just kind of jab it in there and attach it that way with the paint drying. With that part dry, I then grab, believe it or not, more paint. I use a brown paint to carefully paint Jeff onto the tag. Once dry, I slide it on. Then I need to add a little design onto his collar, which is done in paint. I know, crazy, right? I wouldn't have believed it either. Now with it dried, he's finished. That's Jeff. To be honest, I probably would have made this video sooner, but I just didn't like the game. I played it a few times and just didn't really enjoy it. That is until my Fantastic Four video where I played The Thing. I think my problem was, every time I played it, I was playing alone at 1 in the morning, not trying to learn anybody, and just generally not having any idea what was going on. Once I finally decided to commit to a character and learn how they're meant to be played, I actually started enjoying it. As of right now, I've just been maining Spider-Man. Speaking of Spider-Man, I actually made him. I figured this video would probably be the best place to show that off. I want to do more characters from the game, but besides Spider-Man and Jeff, there's nobody I feel like really strongly about making. I guess if I had to make anybody, I'd probably make Moon Knight. I also like Wolverine. I think Scarlet Witch's design is really good. Could you imagine if I did a video where I make every character from Rivals? I'd genuinely die before ever doing something like that. 37 characters? Dog, I can barely make 5. And those ones aren't nearly as complicated as these guys. A video like that would be like 8 hours long. Who am I kidding? It'd probably be longer considering the intricate detailing of the characters. If I do end up making any more Rivals characters and you're interested in seeing them, make sure to go over to my Instagram and follow me, because I will post all of that stuff there. As always, my videos are more of a suggestion on how you should make rather than a full guide. You're free to make whatever you want and do it in your own way or whatever you're comfortable with. If you did make this, be sure to send this to me over on my Instagram where I will most likely see it. I love seeing what you guys make.